Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. In a moment, Tom Horn joins us. He is, of course, talking about the Vatican and ETs. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Tom Horn back with us. Tom, of course, researcher, freelance writer, Raiders News Update, reporting on all kinds of incredible information. He's also one of the authors of Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, and also the Nephilim Stargates, and here he is on Coast to Coast. Tom, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, George, it's great to be back with you again.
What is going on at the Vatican and ETs, Thomas?
Well, I have to tell you, man, it has been absolutely crazy. You know, we did shows with you last year on Petrus Romanus.
Yep.
And recall that we predicted that Benedict was going to resign. And we, of course, used the prophecy of the popes, the Malachi or Morgare's prophecy that's kind of on everybody's mind right now. The idea that this current Pope, Pope Francis, is the final pontiff, and no matter what you make of it, he is the last one on the list. And when we were doing these shows on the prophecy of the popes, I kept getting all these calls. I think I got them when I was on Coast to Coast with you last time. People saying, yeah, but what do you make of the Vatican ET connection? And it's interesting that in some way the public seemed to be connecting more with the Vatican ET question than they were even with the prophecy of the popes. This has all been extrapolated to a great deal more. I'm busy as I can possibly be, partly, by the way, because I had gone on the Hagman and Hagman show with Steve Quayle 3 weeks before Benedict stepped down, and I said that his resignation was imminent. Well, then 21 days later, when he stepped down, my phone was ringing off the hook, and everybody wanted to know who my insider at the Vatican was, right? Yeah. So here we have it. The Benedict did step down, just like we predicted. And, oh, by the way, in our book, we said that he would step down in March or April of 2012. And then later in the book, we said, but if he doesn't step down in March or April of 2012, he's certain to step down before the end of 2013. Well, when he did resign just last month, in February 11, the New York Times ran an article called A Statement Rocks Rome, and in that article, they interviewed Giovanni Maria Vian, who is the editor of the Vatican-owned newspaper, the El Observatorio Romano, and in that interview, he confirmed that Pope Benedict actually officially handed in his resignation in March 2012 at exactly the time that we said he was going to. He did it internally. He did it privately to a half dozen members of the Curia, the Vatican government. And then, according to the New York Times article, it was kept in a strict reserve, a secret confidence that nobody could share, not even with other cardinals. And then, essentially what he did was he actually just made it public knowledge when he stepped down officially in February. So, in a very strange way, we were actually right in that prediction in both cases.
What were those signs, Tom, that you saw then?
Well, the signs that we saw, partly, it was just reading tea leaves. In other words, we could see his health was failing. And he himself he is a theologian for the church, and he had argued that if a pope got to the point that he could no longer carry out his functions, that it would be okay under Catholic rules, law, for a pope to abdicate the throne of Peter, to step down. His brother, you remember last year, was saying that he wasn't doing well. He's a priest too, and he was encouraging Benedict to step down. But having said all of that, you know, popes don't step down. Obviously, you always get sick before you die, right? And popes are supposed to stay in office until they die.
That's right.
And so that was only part of it. You might also recall that we had found a 61-year-old codex that had actually been written by a Jesuit priest. He was a Belgian priest, and he had named it The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes. It was written in French. There's only 2 copies in the world that we know of. We found one that was hidden under a bunch of dust at Yale University, and we negotiated a scanned copy of it, translated it into English, and 61 years ago, Jesuit Rene Thibault said that the Pope who would step down to make way for the final one on the mysterious prophecy of the Pope's list would do so in April of 2012. He predicted that 61 years in advance, and he was absolutely right. So now he was a mystic, and he approached it as a mathematician, a code breaker. He was an anagram solver. He was an academic for the Catholic Church. He taught in the university there in Egenhoven. But he was also a Catholic mystic, and so there was a lot of prediction going on there. So basically, it was 600 pages of analysis. Now, of course, that book has become an international bestseller since the Pope did step down, like we said he was going to. We're doing all kind of TV shows and stuff. And by the way, thank you very much for having me back on Coast to Coast AM. It's always a pleasure to be here, an honor. But to get back to your question, while we were doing all these shows, and I think this also happened on Coast to Coast, people who would call in kept asking us about, what do you make of the Vatican ET connection? Why is the Vatican spokespersons, and especially the Jesuits, which I think is also related to the election of this new Pope, why are they out there now talking so much about a dynamic ET reality? They're hosting conferences there in Rome. They're inviting experts from all over the world to come in and talk about what will the impact on religion be if official disclosure of extraterrestrial intelligence is made. And so what happened was, with so many people calling in asking all these questions, I asked my co-author, Cris Putnam, I said, what do you think about a new investigation? But if we're going to do this, I mean, we got to do it right. I think we did that with Petrus Romanus. We hired private investigators. Remember, we even looked into the murder of Father Edward Coons. So we took it very seriously in that work we did last year. And I wanted to do the same thing this time around. So we brought in people who could simply compile information, go through just something like 20-some thousand pages of documents and information. But for me and Chris, I thought it would all start by he and I going basically where the rubber meets the road, right? We wanted to go to the Vatican's Astronomical technology.
Oh, you're going right to the source. We
wanted to go right to the source. And so we negotiated that through the university there, University of Arizona, which controls who can or cannot go up on that mountain. You can't just simply go up there. It's basically like trying to climb a goat's trail to get up there anyway, but then the gates are all locked and all these different languages warning that you can't, pass by their locked gate. So we did that through the University of Arizona. To make a long story short, we wanted to meet with the observers who are approved to operate the Vatican's Astronomical Technology Telescope. And I can tell you, George, not only were we not disappointed, we were actually amazed with the openness with which the astronomers at all three of the telescopes on the top of that mountain were willing to give us. They spent the entire day with us. The Jesuit father on duty that day, we actually have him on film telling us that the most important research occurring with the Vatican astronomers is the quest to pinpoint certain extrasolar planets and advanced alien intelligence.
Isn't that amazing? Because I've always wondered, Tom, what the heck is the Vatican doing with observatories?
Well, they're studying deep space, and don't forget, that question was asked on Coast to Coast AM in the 90s when Art Bell asked Father Malachi Martin why was the Vatican so heavily invested in the study of deep space on the top of Mount Graham in Arizona, the very place we went. And I know you know his reply was that they're there because at the highest levels of Vatican administration, they know what is approaching the earth, and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. So
Wormwood.
He spilt the beans on something. And there is something, by the way. There's something that's being watched up there. The Vatican Observatory is the first telescope that we went to while we were there. We met with the Jesuit. They gave us leave of the entire building. They let us climb around on the platforms. They unhooked the chains to let us get up on the,
Well, I guess there's nothing proprietary, right? You're just looking at hardware.
We're looking at hardware. They invited us to come inside the control room to look at the computer screens that were fixed on certain spaces in deep space. But, George, they also were very, very open. In fact, one of the things that astonished us was how open they were with talking about UFOs. In fact, the Vatican, the Jesuit at the Vatican, but also the engineer that met us at the Large Binocular Telescope, which is on top of the mountain there. It's part of the group of telescopes, 3 telescopes up there, but it's the big one. And he spent about 5 hours, I would guess, that day with us, and gave us complete access to all 7 floors of that mighty machine, showed us the Lucifer device that is up there and being used by all of the, whatever they call them. There's a consortium, in other words,
okay,
of astronomers that use that up there. He too said the same thing. He told us that UFOs in deep space, what appear to be intelligently operated craft in deep space, are constant. And especially when they're using the Lucifer device.
All right, hold on for a second, Tom. I want to talk more about that Lucifer device and also the ET contact. Tom Horn with us right here on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. Well, I'm so pleased to tell you that our iPhone and Android apps are up and running and out, and we are getting just incredible response. You can download it. The app is free, by the way, but of course, for you Coast Insiders, it does everything you need. Take advantage of it. Just go to coasttocoastam.com or the iTunes store or the Android store. And back with Tom Horn, whose websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com for you. Tom, we were talking about the UFOs that are out there. I also want to talk with you about the Book of Revelation and Wormwood, which might be the object they're trying to track too with those observatories. But what do you pick up? What is the Lucifer device anyway?
Yeah, well, we were talking about Mount Graham, and the term I couldn't remember a minute ago is the Mount Graham International Observatory. Anyway, on the top of the mountain, there's those 3 telescopes, and it's at the Large Binocular Telescope where you find the Lucifer device, and that's an acronym. It's a big, long, tortured phrase that they came up with to try to make it fit the acronym Lucifer. Basically, this is an instrument that observes in the near-infrared wavelength range. It sits in between the 2 giant, almost 30-foot wide diameter telescope mirrors inside the LBT. And by the way, I should say that that's currently one of the world's most advanced systems, and it's the largest, right now anyway, the largest telescope of its kind in the world. I understand they're building a bigger one somewhere else. But right now it's the biggest one, and so it gets astronomers, famous people from all over the world wanting to be able to use it. And the importance of the infrared Lucifer device is that it can detect objects that are too far away or that are faint to be observed in visible light, like distant planets, nebula, brown dwarf stars, so on. Infrared radiation has longer wavelengths than visible light, and that means that it can pass through gas, dust, without getting scattered. So objects, areas that are obscured from view in the visible spectrum, can be viewed by using Lucifer's infrared technology.
Okay.
For example, UFO researchers have fascinated for a long time about how infrared tech can be used to spot and track unidentified flying objects in the heavens that can't be seen with other telescopes or the naked eye. And in fact, some of the most astonishing UFOs ever caught on film have been recorded with infrared, and people can go to YouTube and just type in infrared UFO and see some of those astonishing UFOs over there.
I saw some, Tom, with some night vision goggles. You could not see them with the naked eye, but you put these goggles on, and there they were, darting all over the place.
Yeah, and that's what the technician, when we got towards the end of the visit we had there at the Large Binocular Telescope that day, we went up into the control room, and that's a really big control room. It's real long. It's got computer screens going everywhere, and there must have been 7 or 8 astronomers sitting in there. while we were in there, and a whole bunch more of them in the lunchroom around the corner, and the Germans were there working on different things. And but he sat there and showed us their screens and talked about how common UFOs are, so much to the point that it was almost like it was just blasé, right? Like they were just bored with watching these armadas in deep space. We found that to just be extraordinary. But there is a connection, even though the Vatican Observatory is not the one that has the Lucifer device in it. There is a connection. In fact, if you go to the Vatican Observatory website, right on the website concerning the Lucifer device is a heading that's intriguing. The heading is, quote, NASA and the Vatican's infrared telescope called Lucifer, a German-built, NASA and the Vatican-owned and funded infrared telescope for looking at Nibiru nemesis.
Amazing.
Quote. That's right on there.
Who would want to call a telescope or anything Lucifer?
Well,
even if it's, an acronym for something.
Right. The Jesuits will say they didn't have any part in the naming of the infernal Lucifer instrument. What they don't point out, though, to the public is that they have access to using it, and they do use it, and they're an integral part of the whole complex of Mount Graham International Observatory, and as such, they're connected, by the way, to the very consortium. The German astronomers that did name Lucifer are part of the odious Max Planck Institute. That's the group, that gave assistance to the murderous experiments of Nazi scientist Dr. Mengele in the 1940s. They're the ones that did name it, and one of the Jesuits said they thought they named it that way just so they could poke fun at the Jesuits next door. But then one of the things we did following our visit there that day, when we came down off the hill, Brother Guy Cosmonalgo did not happen to be at the VAT that day, and he was one of the guys that I wanted to talk to, so we contacted him directly, and he gave us 4 interviews from Rome, and but he indicated that the Borg, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, the Borg, not the Borg, but the Borg, that they have a Jesuit point man in the search for alien planets that uses the Lucifer device. His name's Father Paul Gabor, and actually he has a PhD thesis from Paris Observatory on doing that very work, astrobiology, the search for exoplanets, and so on. One of the other things, George, that we found to be extraordinary the day that we were there, and then afterward following up with some of the Native American Indians that live around there, we heard a lot when we were at Mount Graham about how the native people did not want the Vatican to put that observatory on the top of that mountain. They didn't want the LBT or anybody else up
Why
there
not?
either. They formed a lawsuit against them. They got environmentalists to join a lawsuit with them, and actually the government in Arizona, Congress, basically had to do an in-run around environmental law in order to allow the construction on the mountain. And to answer the question, why not? It's because Mount Graham is one of the 4 holiest mountains in the Americas for Native American people, and it is because, George, it is for them what we would call in our terminology a stargate. It is a portal. It is, for the Native Americans, Mount Graham is a sacred location that goes way back into their history, and it is a place where doorways open, where supernaturalism, metaphysical occurrences occur, and things move in and out of that reality. And so for them, it wasn't just holy because the Native American Indians had lived and died there, before the white man came, but it was because it's a supernatural place. Not too far from there is what they call the Superstition Mountains, and that's where bad medicine, according to their holy men, unfolds. But so we found that out, and so we followed up with the American Indian, the Apache, by the way, the San Carlos Apache, and found that not only is it universally associated with deities and spirits that can move in and out of that location, but they have a whole mythos. For instance, they have a creation myth associated with that region, in which the time before time, there was this giant disk that descended down from out of heaven.
There you go.
And in it sat a bearded man, and he was the creator, and he begins creating. Not long after, another entity comes through. He looks like a man, but he's not really a man. He's a dragon. And he is a deceiver, and he starts deceiving the American tribes. But furthermore, George, they describe entities, for instance, some of their folklore around owls, and why they don't like owls. The owl, to the Apache Indian, dreaming of an owl signifies approaching death.
Well, it's funny, in the movie The Fourth Kind, that's what people saw, an owl-looking creature.
That's exactly right. It's actually part of the whole ufological legends. In fact, owls associated throughout Christian history, too, with sorcery, flying witches, flying things, but it's also mirrored in abduction tales. We found that to just be extraordinary, that so much of what they write about there is comparable in two different ways. One, it seems very much to compare with much of what's said in ufology, where the owl, how does the story go? The abductee sees an alien gray, but they are convinced that it really wasn't a gray. It's just your mind is pregnant with the image of an owl that you saw somewhere at some time.
Well, and Mothman. People thought Mothman looked like an owl as well, remember?
Yeah, that's exactly right. But when you talk to the natives there, they describe the same stuff, the same kind of stuff, the discs that come down, the bearded man, the creators that came in the time before time, the deceivers who also came through these portals. And one of the things that we conclude in our new book, Exo Vaticana, is that we believe that the Vatican specifically chose to work with NASA for that mountain, and NASA probably did too, partly because there's something going on there. And I know, that seems to be like stretching, credulity or something here.
Not really.
But that's the belief system, and it is hundreds of years old concerning Mount Graham. And so that was one thing we didn't expect to see. Now, the San Carlos, they preserved an ancient tale from their early history, and they also talk about a race of giants known as the Jindupids, and these were judged and destroyed by the Great Father, the Sun. In fact, the enormous Phoenix metropolitan area, which has Maricopa County and Pinal counties, you often hear it referred to as the Valley of the Sun. Well, that's because, according to the Indian legend, there was a race of Indians. They were called the Tartams. They lived in that valley. They were peaceful farmers. And one day they're invaded by these Jindupids, which are Goliaths. I mean, they use tree limbs for toothpicks, according to legend, Nephilim. And they're led by this massive man that's named Evilkin, who comes from the northeast. He's headed to the south, and they're on their way to the Gulf of Baja. But these giants nearly wipe out the Tartams, and the Tartams hide themselves underground in the mountains. But that's when the father-son throws this huge fireball, meteorite or something like that, and it sears the monstrous giants into the scorched mountain rock. Their lore also seems to agree with, some of the stuff in the higher mountains that David Flynn and people like that have written about in the past.
Let me ask you this, Tom, and then we're going to take calls with you next hour. Wormwood, which is described in the book of Revelation as an object that approaches the planet. Is it possible that the Vatican Observatory is looking for that?
Well, absolutely they might be. And again, most intriguing was Father Malachi Martin, who before he died said that the reason they have that observatory up there is that they're watching something that is approaching the Earth. Now, there is... What is it's the Catholic prophecy of the Great Comet. And some people thought that Malachi Martin might have been referring to that, but others say no, he was referring to the near future arrival of alien intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, when we interviewed Father Guy Cosmonalgo, One of the questions I asked him was what he thought of Malachi Martin's claims that Cosmonaugo, who splits his time between Mount Graham and then the smaller observatory that they have in Gandolfo,
right.
Italy, he's the keeper of the Pope's meteorites, right? So what he thought of Malachi Martin, he actually seemed to be miffed. He told me, he said, I've heard stories about the late Malachi Martin, and I'm really suspicious of statements that came from him. And he told me how he was at the observatory in the 90s, and Malachi never visited them, never had anything to do with them, and he actually just seemed to be kind of perturbed by the whole question.
Of course, we have to find out. Maybe they're trying to discredit him at the same time.
Well, see, that's what I thought. In fact, it came across to me as being consistent with how many other Catholic priests actually despised Malachi's willingness to disclose what Rome otherwise wanted buried, including the satanic cabal within the Jesuit order that Malachi wrote about in his best-selling books, including the one called The Jesuits. So, I think there's absolutely could be something to that. And don't forget, it was Malachi who, long before the public knew anything about the pedophilism that was going on among some of the priests, was Malachi who came out and was talking about it publicly and even connected it to satanic activity. In other words, it wasn't just perversion. They were specifically involving, or at least some of the priests were involving themselves with pedophilism for the purposes of creating a kind of satanic energy, and it was very sorcerous.
Something's going on, Tom. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the thing that's most extraordinary, after we were finished with talking with Jose Funes, talking with Guy Cosmonaugo, some of the stuff that Cosmonaugo told us was extraordinary. We won't even have time on this show to go into all of this, but some of these Jesuits believe that official disclosure is imminent. And furthermore, they're creating some very strange theology. And by that I mean we're talking about Opus Dei level theologians who are writing papers now for the Pope's Academy in Rome, for other institutions of the Roman Catholic Church that are to be used for creating new dogma. And some of the stuff they're talking about, people are going to be blown away by some of the documents that Guy Cosmonaugo gave me. And when he's talking about how the world is soon going to look to the aliens for their salvation and the arrival of alien saviors. And I pressed him on some of these questions. I said, well, can you give me an example? I mean, what are you talking about? Is this something, as a brother, you're a Jesuit, you're a brother, that you would find in the Bible somewhere? And believe it or not, to prove his point that there are alien saviors who once before visited the earth and were advanced in their technology and gave the secrets of heaven to mankind, to prove that point, he pointed me to Genesis chapter 6 and literally wrote about the Nephilim. He, in his response to me, talking about the Nephilim, the heroes that were of old, the warriors of renown. And I emailed him back and I said, Brother Cosmonaugo, does the Vatican, do you and other top astronomers, do you actually mean to use the story of the Nephilim from the Bible as an example of the kind of space saviors that man will soon look to for salvation? And he answered in the affirmative, and then gave me the most incredible assertion in that he quoted John 10:16, which says, "Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice." And he said about that, he said, and I'm going to just quote the email he sent me, quote, "Perhaps it's not so far-fetched to see the second person of the Trinity, the Word, who was present in the beginning," John 1:1, talking about Jesus Christ, "coming to lay down his life and take it up again, not only as the Son of Man, but also as a child of these other races," end quote. That's his quote. And so then I emailed him back and I said, whoa, so not only the Nephilim, Vatican scholars believe that Jesus might have been the star child of an alien race. That's what you just said, that he's a child of these other races.
Yeah.
And I asked him, do you and the Jesuits actually secretly hold that the virgin birth was in reality an alien abduction scenario in which Mary was impregnated by E.T., giving birth to the hybrid Jesus? And at that point, he would not answer that question, but that was exactly what he said.
And it's happening now to millions of people.
It is happening to millions of people. And by the way, I talked to you one time, a long time ago, George, about a situation in my family involving my sister. But I will tell you something that I haven't said on radio until now. It's in this book for the first time in my life. It's going to explain to a lot of people why I've always had an interest in this area. It's the biggest secret in the book, Vatican. It's something I've kept buried my entire adult life. It's remained sealed due to a binding agreement, actually, a settlement between members of my family, state authorities, and federal investigators. Part of this has to do with a family member.
All right, well, tell us the secret when we come right back, Tom. Plus, we'll take some phone calls with you. We've got a split show for you tonight, so we've got Tom Horn for another hour. Your calls, back in a moment.
Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.